We're recording, Alfred. So anything you say now will be recorded, okay?
Okay.
Alfred, I've got a question. What does Daddy do as a job?
Work.
Yeah, but what kind of work?
Talking work.
Talking work, good point. What's your favourite farm animal?
House.
What noise does a cow make?
Moo.
Good job. If you could eat any food, what would it be?
Cucumber.
Ooh. Do you want to ask me a question?
What's your favourite food if you don't like slugs?
I don't like slugs, no. My favourite food probably would be...
Daddy pie?
Daddy pie?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, fair enough, mate. Hello and welcome to Agonomics with me, David Udall. I know, time flies. Another episode already. Here we go again. As always, we continue our mission to bring together the worlds of economics and agriculture. They don't always seem to get along, but that doesn't mean they aren't both of equal importance to your business. In this episode, I'm joined by analyst George Craddock. It's George's first time on the podcast, so welcome, George. Will be nice. We'll be looking at the recent outlooks published over the last few weeks, covering inputs, looking at feed, energy, fertiliser, straw prices, among others. Please do follow and subscribe to this podcast to make sure you don't miss an episode. New shows drop Wednesdays at midday, and please get in touch. Comment on any of AHDB's social channels or send us an email to agonomics@ahdb.org.uk. Now, this is the normal part of the podcast where we would then start talking about things that we've done at AHDB recently. But as you may have guessed from my hastily put together intro where I got my son Alfred to help out, I'm not particularly well organised for the podcast this week, and I haven't actually thought of anything else to say. So we're just going to get straight into it and start talking to George. But remember, keep your ears peeled for the secret song titles and we'll try and guess who this week's mystery musical act is. So, George, we are going to be talking about inputs today. We're going to focus on fertiliser to start with, but also do a bit of a review of straw and sort of overall animal feed use as well. It's interesting from a fertiliser perspective because we've seen such a volatile period, and predominantly we're talking about it from a like a arable cropping perspective, but obviously it affects grassland as well in terms of prices. So it's kind of interesting to see those recent trends in usage that we've had, considering we've gone through the past 3 years of that sort of extreme price volatility and how that's affected the way farms have been using fertiliser. So from a headline level, what's sort of the overall view of fertiliser usage in the UK?
Yeah, so we've seen, as you said, prices steady up from their 2022-23 highs, and usage has begun to increase, but it's nowhere near the level it was before those price increases in 22 and 23, because the prices have not come down anywhere near to where they were before we saw that inflation period. So we've seen urea and UAN usage increased, while ammonium nitrate and calcium ammonium nitrate has declined. This is for multiple reasons. The main reason being urea contains more nitrogen per unit, so it's more cost effective to use than the other two.
And I think that's a key thing when we're talking about fertiliser, isn't it? It's like cost efficiency and efficiency of application. That's kind of like the critical thing. It's interesting. DEFRA have recently released their official fertiliser survey for the year, based on Farm Business Survey data. Here's an interesting stat that I saw, that across farms in England specifically is what it's looking at. 93% of farms apply nitrogen in England. So 7% of farms don't apply any nitrogen.
More than you thought, as such an effective tool to boost productivity. Yeah. You'd think most farms would maximise their usage, but no, it's down. And that's, again, since 2022 and 2023, isn't it, if we're looking at the stats?
Yes, definitely. So that's seen a reduction. But I guess that's probably, obviously, that there might be more prevalence of organic and regenerative practices that maybe are moving people away from the classic application of inorganic nitrogen, and maybe even a bit of a view forwards of thinking about the future upcoming challenges from a nitrogen perspective, predominantly that carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is something that could impact the price of nitrogen. And we as AHDB were actually doing some work with AIC and NFU to kind of calculate the impact of that at the moment, which we'll be looking to release soon.
CBAM could come into place in 2027. This could put massive pressure on fertiliser prices as we import most of our fertiliser. We've lost much of our production capacity in the UK as we lost the only factory that we had remaining in the UK. I think it was last year. So it's definitely going to put pressure on prices going forward if it comes into place.
And when you talk about prices, obviously, from a fertiliser perspective, evidently still at the risk of those kind of bigger, wider geopolitical risks. We've got that continuing instability. I think, if anything, one of the things that's a bigger risk is actually the logistics and the shipping, the way that everything is interconnected. This is another one of those reasons why we saw those high prices a few years ago. Not only was it a commodity level price from the price of gas increasing, but it was obviously linked to the logistical impact of coming out of COVID as well, and the cost of shipping and things increasing. So it's still going to be, I suppose, the classics. And while things have definitely calmed down, I suppose there's a bit more of an uncertainty in the world at the moment, driven by trade spats. When does a trade spat turn into a trade war? I don't know if there's an official economic point, but we're probably heading that way, you'd feel, aren't we, on an emotional level? There's just risk out there in the world. Probably one of those reasons from a farmer perspective, fertiliser in the not too distant past was very much something that was just a relatively static purchase. But I think because of the volatility in prices and because of the concerns about environmental impact, etc., it's something that requires more thinking time from a farmer perspective to actually understand what's driving their market and the best decisions for them.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many factors that are affecting it right now. You've got the Red Sea, there's lots of risks going on there, and then obviously Trump coming in. He's going to put a lot of pressure going forward. A lot of our UAN comes from the US and Trinidad and Tobago, so he could have a massive impact on the prices of that going forward.
And this is one of those things where there may not be kind of direct tariffs that are put on these products, but it's more of the knock-on effect of how other tariffs flow through and how it comes together. So I guess it's just that, considering we're more and more linked into that global trading arm from a fertiliser perspective, and that current global trade perspective is very unstable, if that's the right way to put it. I guess it's just that bigger, broader uncertainty around it, isn't it?
There's such a big point going back to food security. It's the big topic at the moment. There's such a need for possibly a UK demand for production of fertiliser if we really want to focus on food security going forward, just because we don't have that capacity at the moment to produce enough at all.
And it's also all of the other products that come out of it as well, isn't it? That obviously, you're producing your own ammonia. There's all of the chemical offshoots that come out of it, CO2, etc. So it isn't just singularly about producing AN. Ammonium nitrate in some instances is actually just the byproduct of other production processes. Like you say, it's linked into far bigger aspects of the supply chain. Again, when we had the issues a few years ago, those closures of fertiliser plants was directly linked to shortages of CO2 and therefore the ability to stun animals in slaughterhouses, etc. So it's one of those things where it's intrinsically linked with the whole food supply chain. Right, George, we're going to have a break now. Ain't that a shame that we're going to have a break and move away from fertiliser prices? When we come back, we'll be talking about straw and other inputs as well.
Hi, I'm Gabriel Jassy, analyst at AHDB, with a look at grain and oilseed markets for the week beginning the 10th of March. Domestic feed wheat futures have fallen significantly over the past couple of weeks, now hitting around £175 per tonne for May. Changes in US trade policy and countermeasures by other countries are a key driver. US tariff hikes from 4th March caused a sharp drop in US grain prices. The following suspension of tariffs on Canada and Mexico provided some respite, while 20% tariff on Chinese goods remain. There's optimism around this year's Chinese wheat crop, which further reduced their imports after the record crop last year. Meanwhile, weather conditions in other parts of the northern hemisphere are also improving. Paris rapeseed futures have also lost ground recently following the wider oilseed complex. This was mainly driven by the changes in US trade policy and China's 100% tariffs on rapeseed oil and meal imports from Canada. Trade policy and weather conditions are expected to remain key factors for grain and oilseed market in the coming weeks. To stay up to date with the latest data and analysis across arable, red meat, and dairy markets, head to ahdb.org.uk and click on Markets and Prices.
If you're in the market for another podcast to subscribe to, then look no further than our Manager's Special, AHDB's Food and Farming podcast. Recent episodes include a consumer insight offering on red meat labels and supermarket aisles, as well as a dairy special about our work with retailers to promote milk. If you're after herbs, or rather herbal lays, our shelves are stacked with sage advice on how to introduce lucerne and clover into your fields. In fact, we cater for all tastes, so you'll find sections dedicated to all sectors: pork, cereals and oilseeds, dairy and beef and lamb. And don't forget our middle aisle, where you can often pick up a bargain episodes you didn't know you needed to listen to. Search Food and Farming wherever you get your podcasts. AHDB thanks you for your custom.
Welcome back to part 2 of Agronomics. We are slipping and sliding into a conversation about straw. So, George, what's the overall view of the straw market situation at the moment?
I think it's so weather dependent on the straw. There's a lot that could happen with it, really. It depends on agro-environmental schemes, the weather, as I said. It depends on the farmer's decision as to whether they want to chop or bale, and then the quality of the crop. I know, depending on the area of the country you're in, if you've got your winter drilling done, then the quality of the straw should be okay. But if you're spring planting, then the straw isn't always the best quality. So there's a lot of factors going on in straw.
So delving a bit deeper into the world of straw then, George, from a wheat straw and barley straw perspective, what is the current market conditions for those two commodities?
So coming out of 2024 harvest to 2025, we're seeing a tighter supply and therefore higher costs than we've seen in the few previous years. Contracting costs are definitely fueling this. We've seen the prices of fuel and wrapping come down, but this has not been reflected in the actual contracting costs that are being charged out to farmers, again supporting the price level where they are. So we expect to see prices stabilised where they are until harvest 2025. Winter cropping area has fallen, and this will impact overall straw availability. We also see spring crops. The straw quality is never as good as winter crops just because of maturity. So that will definitely have an impact on the amount of straw that is baled. A lot of the decisions that are made are dependent on the weather around harvest, and also the decision by farmers as to whether to chop or bale. So this will definitely impact supply. We might start to see the impact of environmental schemes coming in, so SFI. Whether that has an impact on supply of straw, we'll have to see. There's not enough information out there yet as to whether this has impacted it. So let's wait for the weather and see what that brings in terms of harvest for 2025.
So what about hay then, George? There's differences between the two markets, between the straw and the hay market, isn't there?
Hay market is usually processing that a bit earlier in the season. So we usually see a drop off in prices a bit earlier than straw. It seemed to be a bit sticky last year, 2024. So in terms of switching between hay and straw and then forage use, farmers haven't been able to make that switch as easily because of the prices tracking. So yeah, the prices have aligned, which we don't usually see. We usually see hay prices a bit lower than those straw. But going into 2025, they are tracking each other.
And the other thing we've got to consider here is in terms of the question of what is baled into hay, considering the impact of environmental schemes and things that could be baled into hay, and are they baled into hay? It's a bit of a confusing situation, isn't it? One where there isn't really much clarity from the data.
Yeah, so we've got the usage statistics from the SFI, which came out in February. We've got them, but it doesn't actually tell us what the impact is going to be on baling and production of hay. We could see really tight supplies going into 25 because everybody's chosen the schemes, which mean you can't bale or you're only taking one cut instead of three. We're going to have to wait and see what the market tells us as to what the impacts are of these schemes.
And then obviously with the recent closure of SFI, there's a question of if people were waiting to sort of see what the conditions were like to decide if they should go into those options, and now those options have been closed. Adds more kind of uncertainty to the picture, because suddenly there may be people that could have been restricted in their practices that are now not restricted in their practices, and it feels as if it's one where there isn't really any, as you say, clear vision, I suppose, if that's the right word, to actually show what's coming next.
Absolutely. It's going to be an interesting one to watch. Weather, again, or coming back to that word, is definitely going to play an impact as well. So it's definitely an interesting market to watch going into 2025.
Cool. Thank you, George. Right, we've covered off a couple of the main inputs that we wanted to go through there. So thank you for your time on the podcast today, George. The lesson of today, if I'm perfectly honest, for me, is better preparation because we winged this one, didn't we, George? Let's not lie about it. Well, I winged it. You were far more prepared than I was. Someone who didn't wing it was our producer Alice this week, who came up with a great artist for the song titles that we weave in, and not obvious ones, phrases that you would use quite naturally. It was John Lennon songs, post-Beatle John Lennon songs. So yeah, that's who it was. So thank you, Alice. That was a good one. That was a difficult one. We like a difficult one.